Welcome to the PHONEWORD workshops, third Wednesday of the month workshop for December 17th, 2014. It is 11 a.m. Eastern Time, and today we're going to be talking about part 2 of our December conversation about ENUM, registry architecture, and federation. So if you didn't see the first part, which was recorded on December 10th, 2014, if you're looking at the website, phonewordworkshops.com, you can scroll down a little bit. You can watch that. It's about 23 minutes, I believe. And it's sort of an abbreviated version of what we're going to be talking about today in a little bit more depth. So I'm going to give just a summary. What are we talking about? We're talking about a new era, a new realm of global connectivity using something called end user opt-in ENUM, which has been talked about and developed for about 15 years, but for whatever reason has been slow, if not stalled or dormant for implementation. There's some new initiatives underway that bring to light the promise of end user opt-in ENUM, which has yet to come together, yet to gel, and it's, at least in my opinion, I think there's a brand new opportunity and something akin to what we saw with tablet computing. Actually, it's much more profound, much broader than tablet computing, but for years, the idea of tablet computing was already there, starting with Apple when they tried to introduce the Newton, which was a failure, and then Microsoft and IBM tried to introduce tablet PCs, and that was a failure. So it wasn't until Apple came along with the iPad and the right combination of elements were finally there to usher in a whole new realm of user experience, computing, media, just a whole multitude of value cases and user benefits that until Apple came along and introduced the iPad, that whole concept of tablet computing was basically dead. So I think something is available using end user opt-in ENUM that's akin to that, let's say, coming together tipping point, if you will, to use a cliche, that's now available particularly in the realm of the transition from the public switch telephone network into an all internet protocol environment and network. So I'm not sure if anybody will be joining us today. There's a large conference that's going on in Europe that's starting today, and a meeting that's just concluding that is dealing with web real-time communications, or web RTC, which is very much part of this mix. So I'm going to go ahead and jump into the presentation for today and go into a little bit more depth than where we went on December the 10th. So you should now be able to see the PHONEWORD workshops presentation for both December 10th and December 17th. And what we're talking about is registry architecture and federation, an innovation in that area that is designed to open up a whole new realm of connectivity across platforms, in fact, across all platforms. And it's actually much more profound than just that, just connectivity. It deals with identity management, it deals with media, it deals with a whole new realm of possibilities. So our agenda for today is to talk a little bit about the intention of the December workshops. We're going to investigate a proposed registry architecture that includes both null records or null records and active records in a registry using what's called NAPTR pointers. And that's, I believe, naming authority pointer records. We're also going to talk about a structure, an implementation structure, where the ENUM registries that are part of this federation are part of being that part of that federation is that there is a record that's created, either a null record or an active record, that encompasses all permutations of possible beginning point records or active records. We'll also talk about some next steps. We'll talk about how the federations can work, federated registries can work together, and go into a little bit of the scope of what this is going to look like in terms of actual numbers. So that's our agenda for today. And the intention of these workshops is really to foster a new realm of collaboration. It's also to move prototypes along for the registry, for the web user interface, and for a telephony set of functionalities to go with this. But beyond the technology, which is part of the innovation, we're also talking about innovation in business model, policy, and governance, which I think are key elements which has kept a lid on end user opt-in ENUM over the last 15 years. So those are the intentions. What are we talking about? What's the use case? What problem are we trying to solve? Or one of the problems we're trying to solve, because we're actually addressing multiple issues in, excuse me. I was getting a call from overseas, and hopefully it's someone trying to connect to our session today. But we are talking about what's one of the problems that we're addressing here. Well, one of the problems that we're addressing is the address chaos that we all face. We all have this exploding set or basket of addresses, all our social media, all our internet connectivity like email addresses, all our telephony connectivity like telephone numbers. We've got multiple accounts. All of this is becoming a huge and growing set of what I'm calling address chaos. Well, part of what we're talking about ushering in is a new era of address harmony, where end users, us as individuals or as company entities, can start to add some workability and harmony to all our disparate addresses. So part of the mix is this whole thing being browser centric. So what if we could open up a browser, we could go to a particular URL, URI, and have something that looks like this dialer. We could enter something like this 602 element over here. We could dial 602, press call or enter, and all of a sudden there's a list of additional endpoints that could be clicked upon and selected. So I won't go into that because we've covered that in other workshops, other areas, but and you can take a look at some of the other work that's been done on the PhoneWord workshops to dive in deeper into how that would work. Continuing on in the presentation, this is an exploration. It's also an experiment in innovation, because we're using new elements like these Google Hangouts to see how we can do collaboration, how we can explore new areas. And we're also looking at how can we combine and touch upon multiple generations to work together. And what am I talking about by generations? Well, I'm talking about people, I'm talking about devices, I'm talking about technologies, I'm talking about a whole set of legacy as well as contemporary elements starting to work together through a unified addressing system, a unified naming, addressing, and numbering system. Now, what's that going to take? Well, it's going to take multiple registries working together somehow. I've been involved in end-user opt-in ENUM for about 12 years now, and there's been a lot of work that's been done at the Internet Engineering Task Force, which is a global consortium of people setting standards and design elements for the internet. And this idea of using a telephone number-like address as sort of a central starting point to combine connectivity addressing elements has been around for a long time. There have been a lot of very, very smart people that have spent a lot of time and effort in trying to make this work. And for a number of reasons, certain obstacles and barriers have been encountered such that end-user opt-in ENUM has not flourished the way it's been envisioned for about 15 years. Well, it's my assertion, and there's some other people out there, such as the nrenum.net community, the e164.org, the folks in the Czech Republic, as well as some other countries around the world, that think that end-user opt-in ENUM still has some potential. And you can look at some of the other workshops that have been done where we've talked about this. You can also look at PhoneWord.com under the PhoneWord forum and listen to some of the other conversations where we've talked about what is the potential for end-user opt-in ENUM. You can also look at the conversation that surrounded the United States Federal Communications Commission, their initiative that was launched earlier this year, basically in January of this year, 2014, to encourage a numbering test bed. And you can see that the conversation for ENUM, not necessarily end-user opt-in ENUM, although if you really tear it apart, you can see that there has been basically, the conversation really has been, has touched upon end-user opt-in ENUM, but the notion, the value proposition, the promise of end-user opt-in ENUM continues to persist and continues to come up in the context of how's it going to work when we switch from the old copper telephone network, we retire that, and we move into an all-internet realm. So this is the proposal that's being talked about today on the PhoneWord workshops. Federation. Federation of what? Well, federation of registries. So how do we open this up as a global opportunity And you'll notice on this image that it's basically outlines of continents. There is no definition of traditional boundaries and borders here. This is really something that starts to open up a global opportunity that starts to transcend legacy borders and definition points that have existed in the past. So this is also a collaborative opportunity where certain, let's say, establishment of registration occurs somewhat akin to a land registry or a title registry that has been associated with either real estate or automobiles in the past. So moving on, we've talked about, okay, what if some of the existing registries that are out there or registries that are about to be built, what if they started to work together in a federated fashion? So we have e164.org, and we've had a session on that in the PHONEWORD forum in the past. The quote golden tree has been e164.arpa, which was originally envisioned as, okay, the registry is going to be housed within the e164.arpa. We've got enrenum.net, which is a global consortium of academic and research institutions around the world, numbering about 35, maybe approaching 40 by now. They are working on an end user ENUM registry and architecture. There's FRED, which has been built and operated by cz.nic in the Czech Republic, which is operating about, I believe, 8 countries around the world for their top level domains. The ENUM portion of this has sort of gone dormant. However, it is an open source registry that's available. And we had a session just this last month with actually the day before Thanksgiving, where we talked about the FRED registry and some of its elements with Jaromir Talir of cz.nic. We've also got PHONEWORD.org, which is a proposed registry associated with the PHONEWORD initiative, and then something that's a little more basically approaching or addressing a different market, which is 101hollywood.org, which also might operate as 800hollywood.org. So here are 6 initial registries that might come together in a federated fashion that favor open source versus proprietary registry structure. And this is just a diagram showing how multiple 2 or more registries might work together. Now, this architecture could accommodate proprietary registries as well. And it could accommodate registries that are operating using a multitude of technologies. For instance, FRED uses things like Apache, Python, let's see, Ubuntu, a variety of technologies. I'm not quite sure what enrenum.net is using. I'm not quite sure what e164.org is using. I don't believe this is open source. e164.arpa has manifested itself in a variety of ways. PHONEWORD.org is proposing writing from scratch a registry architecture, registrar architecture, and registrant elements and end user elements, client elements that are full stack JavaScript. The same with 101hollywood.org. And we'll talk about that a little bit later. But this diagram is intended to accommodate many more registries than just 6 registries. It should imply that there could be, we don't know how many registries that might work within this federation. So moving on, let's take an example. Let's take a look at what if we had a virtual address like 101 J Carpenter, and we wanted to create a fully qualified domain name that matched that virtual address. So we would look at something like initially this. Let's say, and let's assume that 101 J Carpenter is a virtual address that I'm going to use and start to put out among my community to connect with me. And I like the registry of 101hollywood.org. So there's a fully qualified domain name that's created within 101hollywood.org. And actually, that's going to be pre-populated based upon this registry proposal. So part of what is important to understand here is that all permutations of up to 15 digits, which is, I believe, 100 quadrillion fully qualified domain names, will exist from at least, if not the day one, close to the day one of this registry architecture and federation. And that's, I believe, part of the key for this whole thing to work. So in other words, there has to be a null record, a set of placeholders that forms the foundation of this registry architecture to work, and the federation. So if you're interested in seeing an elaboration on this point, let's see. Bear with me just a moment. You can read this paper, which was created December 19th, 2005, and it talks about how null records could be the starting point for a registry structure and architecture. So this part on null records. Now, a lot of this is outdated, and a lot of this was written in anticipation of a registry being created in North America, at least. However, the basic concept of a key piece of this all to work is a set of null records that encompasses the naming space in its entirety at the beginning of the launch of the architecture for end user opt-in enum. Now, the other part of this that's discussed is an open market for subscriber rights. Now, that might sound off topic for people that are looking at, okay, how do we start this technically? I assert that an open market for subscriber rights or user rights to naming, addressing, and numbering is a key piece that's been missing out of the mix for this all to work. And I talk a little bit about that in this paper, and there's some other papers that have been talked about, but what this builds upon are some key constructs that have been tried and true over the past. in very similar situations where we're starting to take something that's been used in the past, in this case a numbering space, and we're trying to move it into a new realm. Now, the analogy is the Homestead Act of 1862. And you can read about that, how the entire western half of the United States basically was settled, and how the homestead functionality ushered in a way to create dispute resolution in sort of a organic fashion, or not exactly organic, but at least a structured fashion. You can read about how that approach opened up a whole new realm of value, of innovation, of development that wasn't available before the Homestead Act of 1862. Now, you can also read about this, Ronald Coase's work with the Federal Communications from 1959, where something that was commons in a radio spectrum was transformed into something that had a better set of property rights around it. And to this day, we are still using Ronald Coase's work in the spectrum auctions, in dispute resolution, in the transfer of resources into something that's new. And radio spectrum, just like the land that was west of the Mississippi, moved from a realm of commons into a realm of usable rights that all of a sudden opened up something that wasn't available in the past. And you can read more about, how that took place, some of the academic work that's behind that whole realm in some of these other papers. And so these are all dealing with spectrum and how spectrum moved from commons into property rights. And some of this, such as this, was actually produced by people working with or for the Federal Communications Commission. One of the papers that I would highlight is Leslie Seltzer's Market-Based Allocation of Toll-Free Telephone Numbers, which was produced at a FCC colloquium, and I believe in 2002, 2004, I think it was 2002. And this talks about how a market-based approach to toll-free telephone numbers would work, and some of the reasons that that's a compelling approach. There's more work that was produced here, and this is an important work, academic research piece. Telephone number allocation property rights approach from the European Journal of Law and Economics in 2003. And this professor or academic talks about how portability has actually ushered in a new realm of property rights, or something that's more akin to property rights than how telephone numbering used to be in the commons approach. And I won't go, what I would like to also say about that is that there's been a collapse of telephone numbers, E.164 addressing, and fully qualified domain names. So that collapse, I think, creates a lot of confusion and a lot of roadblocks in the overall initiative to usher in a new realm of end-user opt-in ENUM, which actually stands for electronic number mapping. There's some other definitions of ENUM out there, but I assert that ENUM originally and still the proper definition for ENUM is electronic number mapping, which is different than E.164 number mapping. So you can scroll through. There's some other pieces that are referenced in this paper. Some of these links might be broken. If you're really interested in some of these pieces, send me an email and I can probably dig them up for you if you can't connect to them directly through this paper. But this is what we're talking about. We're talking about fully qualified domain names, and these are fully qualified domain names being set up in a federated ENUM structure where there's a placeholder, but there's only one active record, if there is an active record, that exists among the federation. So I hope that's clear. Here's how it would look if I'm the end user of this fully qualified domain name and I want to switch registries. I can simply transfer or quote port from 101hollywood.org over to something like e164.org. So if I don't like the pricing structure, I don't like the policy structure, I don't like whatever, I can go from, this is backing up a slide, I can go from 101hollywood.org is my registry where the active records are held to e164.org, or it could be any other number of registries that are within this registry architecture. So here's another dimension to the proposal. The proposal is that, and let me back up a slide, even though some of these registries exist today and they're created out of a different set of technologies, this is Apache, Ubuntu, Python, this is, I don't know what's in e164.org, could be Java, could be who knows what. PHONEWORD.org is talking about full stack JavaScript. 101 Hollywood, full stack JavaScript. What's being proposed here is a collaborative creation of open source software that could accommodate in a contemporary fashion the functionality of any one of these existing registries. So the best example of that is the Fred registry. Jaromir Talir and the folks at cz.nic and elsewhere around the world have done an incredible amount of work building the basic elements of Fred. And I think it's an excellent roadmap or blueprint for what could be created with a collaborative open source initiative, development initiative that would take contemporary elements, REST APIs, JSON, full stack JavaScript, and maybe we use some other things, or maybe people can experiment with other things like Go or Golang, whatever. It doesn't necessarily have to stay within this technology component, but at least this is a pretty common stack. It's a stack that relies upon JavaScript that's understood by many web developers. So it creates this common, ubiquitous platform, technology platform that can be created where many people could contribute, many people could hopefully easily understand a JavaScript construct at some level, excuse me, oops, and could now utilize and leverage a non-relational database like MongoDB, a server-side JavaScript construct like Node.js, things like Angular, which creates a modular approach to front-end frameworks, Express, which does some of the automation required to tie some of this stuff together, leverages WebRTC. One of the missing pieces of WebRTC is the signaling, and I think what we're talking about here starts to open up an interesting opportunity to at least experiment with how WebRTC signaling might be really accelerated using end-user opt-in enum. Again, we're talking about JavaScript as the primary tool set, technology, language, if you will, for this construct to happen. There has to be a fallback position for telephony. So what do I mean by that? Well, what I'm talking about is if people cannot connect using the contemporary platform, which is something like what you're watching now in a Google Hangout, if people cannot connect when they enter a numeric or an address, then this can be constructed so that the baseline default is always a traditional telephone call. So that's what I'm talking about in terms of the telephony. The analogy might be if you tried to connect to this Google Hangout and for whatever reason you couldn't connect, part of the PhoneWord workshops is offering a telephone number that you can dial into, and at least you can hear the audio portion. That's what we're talking about in terms of the telephony. The security element is something that's very, very important. In the January PhoneWord forum, we will be talking about a new approach to security that takes into account market-based elements. I'm not going to talk about security in this workshop, but security becomes a very key issue in the whole ecosystem that we're talking about in terms of the technology, the business models, and the governance and policy. Whoops. So this reference, see additional material regarding null registrations and record placeholders, is referring to the paper in 2005 that we just went over. So let's start to wrap it up. The conclusion and summary is that there's a new realm of innovation and opportunity sets. There's a new realm of collaboration and creation of open source software that is a huge break from the legacy approach to software development, which has, for the most part, been proprietary. And if this initiative, well, the whole initiative, the PhoneWord initiative, this federated registry and ENUM initiative, I think can explore a new realm of collaboration because of the adoption and embracing of open source software. The other part of this is federating ENUM registries, so we start to take what's already existing in the ENUM space and start to federate it and start to create a workable pathway for migration to a contemporary realm, an opportunity to experiment with dispute resolution using some of the principles that Ronald Coase has put forth and that have been tried and true and tested, as well as some of the principles of, tried and true homesteading approaches. And because of a federated registries structure, I think it opens up an opportunity to experiment with governance. What if this system of registries, or this federation of registries, consisted of both proprietary, open source, nonprofit? Who knows what the governance structure could look like with a federation of registries as proposed. So that's pretty much concluding today's PhoneWord Workshops event. The next workshops events that will be similar to this will be on the second Wednesday of January and the third Wednesday of January, which will be January 14th at 5 p.m. Eastern time, and then January 21st at 11 a.m. Eastern time. And between now and then, the intention is that the PhoneWord Workshops bounty programs will go to the next step. However, those will be different elements. The bounty programs are designed to create open source code. They're also designed to create revenues to drive this. This is all being bootstrapped. There is no funding source per se for the PhoneWord Workshops or the PhoneWord initiatives or this federated registry. This is all being bootstrapped by design to keep it as Swiss neutral as possible. And however, funding will be required. The other thing that I recommend you keep an eye on is the PhoneWord Forum. The PhoneWord Forum will be held, and you can go to phoneword.com and look into the PhoneWord Forum for that. But on January 31st at 4 p.m. Eastern will be the next December 31st, 2014 at 4 p.m. Eastern will be the next PhoneWord Forum, and that will be an open session that's just sort of a recap of some of the key things that have happened during 2014. In January, on the last Wednesday of January, will be the PhoneWord Forum we have scheduled Dr. Robin Hanson, who is an economics professor at George Mason University, who's one of the leading experts in prediction markets, in incentive sets, to bring forth information that otherwise would not be brought forth. And we're going to apply that towards a proposed model for security exploration, how to introduce a new realm of security in the network naming, addressing, and numbering architecture that's being discussed here. So that's what's coming up. And let's stop the screen sharing. And that's what we have on tap. We do have some viewers today, so I appreciate you joining. I appreciate you watching this. If you're watching this on the recording, this space over here, I'm going to experiment with some post-production elements to add some more visual elements that are hopefully helpful. And I appreciate your time and attention. This is an ongoing process. We're going to try some things. Some of them are going to work, some of them aren't going to work, but that's all part of the process. But in my view, this is really an exciting opportunity to create something new and something powerful. So thank you for joining. Please contact me, Jay Carpenter, And you can go to PhoneWordWorkshops.com. You can see the contact information there. I appreciate your time and your attention, and I look forward to continuing the conversation with you. Thank you.